Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content each and every week. Been looking forward to the discussion today. My guest is Malia Lazu, author of the new book, From Intention to Impact, a practical guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Malia is an award-winning tenured strategist in diversity and inclusion, a lecturer in technological innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategic management at the Sloan MIT School of Management. She's also a former executive vice president and regional president of Berkshire Bank, and I can't wait to tap into her expertise. Malia, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. As I said before we came on, I really enjoyed your book, and I've been looking forward to have this conversation. So, I guess the first question I'll have for you is, what motivated you to write a practical guide for diversity, equity, and inclusion for businesses?
I thank you and thank you again for having me on and thank you for reading my book. I often wonder, I'm like, okay, who's really reading it, right?
Right.
And all of that, but I appreciate that. I wanted to write a guide and I wanted it to be accessible and practical because we are at this precipice, right, of our society, of our economy, really trying to figure out how do we go forward, right? How do we go forward in a global economy? And what we're finding is that some of our biggest strengths come from us being such a diverse country and as being welcoming to so many, and so there are a lot of companies who know that and who believe that and who really are trying to include understanding that it'll future proof their company. And I wanted to give some basic steps, right? And some ways to go about it so that people who were earnest would actually have a guide to use.
The surge in DEI awareness for corporate America obviously happened after the tragic death of George Floyd. Yet, some of their initiatives and remedies were superficial at best and cynical at worst. You write about the Walmart Juneteenth ice cream example, which I found just comical. Um, but why do you think that most companies were not able to translate that sentiment into meaningful practices that actually address systematic problems of racial exclusion? And they continue to have a lack of real solutions to improve diversity and equality in their corporate structures.
Yeah, yeah, they do, right? And I think it's because it's the same people who, whether it's unconsciously or consciously, uphold the current culture, which is white, heteronormative, right? And they are the ones in charge of setting, right, the strategy forward. And this is why in the book, I talk about white ignorance, right? This theory of Charles Mills, and this ignorance that refuses to resolve itself, right? It's needed, and it's important for people who want to go from intention to impact to understand what are their narratives that may even have them being nervous. I mean, I've had folks come up to me and say, I agree with everything you say, but I just worry about my sons and the future they may have, right? Talking about their white children, right? And while that seems like a very natural thing for someone to do, it's actually something that's based in white supremacy that protects white privilege. And if you understand that, you might not say it that way, right? You might not look at it that way. And I think really that's what corporations need to understand is that if they really want to do this, that it's not about just, burdening HR and not giving them budget and telling them all of a sudden to change the culture, but it's about being able to self-reflect on what's important in the culture, what are those sacred cows, and what might we have to change in order to get the impact we'd like to see.
Um, Something I found very interesting, you wrote about the concept of decentralization. Why is that such a key factor in addressing the challenges of corporate DEI programs?
I think decentralization is something that really should be used with any organizational structure, right? I think it strengthens organizational structure where it can be done. Now, in corporations, obviously there is a hierarchy, right? Like you can't necessarily supersede that hierarchy, but there are places within a corporation where hierarchy shouldn't matter, right? And so when you think about DEI, you just need your true believers, right? You're not going to win everyone over, right? There are some people that do not believe in it. But, as one of my elders like to say, Jesus only had 12 disciples. We don't need everybody, right? We just need some true believers. But they need to be able to do what they do, right? So whether it's in the mailroom or it's an office manager, right? Or it's the CEO, they should all have the same ability to work on DEI and to be inclusive and not necessarily wait for edicts from above or only do it if it's in the budget. And so decentralizing allows for these pre-existing networks. I talk about the employee resource groups, right? Just different configurations that aren't hierarchical based, that'll let you find your champions of DEI and your catalysts of DEI, and together they'll innovate a new culture for you that's authentic and that will be sustainable.
Um, Another thing you list in your book, the 7 stages from intention to impact. What I found interesting, and what I noticed, is that 3 of the stages revolve around pushback and resistance, which you kind of alluded to in your last answer. Why is it so important to call out that pushback and address it openly and forcefully during the corporation's journey towards being more inclusive?
Pushback, if you're not able to navigate it properly and really understand what is a consideration that needs to be taken in and what is bias, right? And those often are two different things, but they get conflated, right? And if you can't navigate between that, what ends up happening is you end up just staying in the first 3 steps, right? Which are, yay, right? We signed a pledge. We're going to do a training, right? We have a hire. Let's try to make them, that person diverse, right? And you take action on low hanging fruit and you'll start getting pushback, right? And it can be anything from someone saying, oh, so are we going to hire less qualified people now, right? To someone saying, well, that's not compliant, right? DEI is illegal, right? This is a common one that's coming up now when that's actually absolutely not true, right? It is not illegal. And because it's being targeted, it can seem like, well, this is just us being safe. But really what you have to understand is it's that you are abdicating your power, right? And you're not protecting your employees and consumers the way they would like to be protected.
Um, can you speak to the difference between being um, anti-racist and non-racist as it relates to addressing some of the challenges of DEI? I wanted to call that out.
Yes, yes, and I'm so thankful for the history of critical race theory and Angela Davis, right? And we now have these terms that can help us name, right, where we want to go. And I think that's really important, right? As we talk about even the evolution of DEI, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it was called affirmative action, and then it became diversity, right? And then it was DNI, right? Like it's been this continual, but this idea of not being racist as being an enough statement, right? Being a statement that should satisfy people. I really wanted to double click on that because what we're seeing with fatigue, right, with the George Floyd fatigue, is that people are starting to fall back on norms, right? And so people are starting to be comfortable with being nice people, decent people, wishing everyone well, definitely not racist, definitely not homophobic. But that's just not enough, right? And the idea of being an anti-racist is proactively deconstructing, right, the racist structures, and not just sitting at, well, racism exists, but I'm not one, so it's okay, because being an American, you uphold racist structures every day. I mean, you and I, right? We uphold them. It's called America. It's called a tax structure, right? It's called an education system. And so it's really not enough to just not be racist, but you really have to work towards, right? You have to be an anti-racist. And we talk about in the book, some frameworks to do it. But for me, what I really enjoyed about that section of the book was talking about that experience that I had in Alabama, and because the conversation, and everyone get the book, just as like a little Easter egg for you. But the conversation was with this, good old boy from Alabama, who had a Confederate flag, on the side of his house. And when I asked him about it, the first thing he said to me was that, this wasn't about slavery for him. His family was too poor to own slaves. And obviously, just, you get this whole, you're seeing a Confederate flag in the streets of Alabama. There's so many layers, especially I think for those of us who are maybe, I was raised in Hawaii, right? I live in, in the Northeast. So you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like I'm in it, like I'm in this moment and this area. And for him to say that I should be comforted because his family didn't own slaves, it seemed like such an odd thing, right? Such an odd blanket to pass me, if you will. And it felt like in the extreme, but it felt like how it feels when someone tells me they're not racist. It's sort of like, well, what am I supposed to do with that, right? So there were slaves, and your family wasn't trying to free people who were being considered chattel. Your family was too poor to buy any of them, right? Like that's somehow an inadequate response. And so tying that story to this idea of not being racist, I thought helped illustrate the point really well.
And I appreciate you writing from such a personal perspective, because you write about just the visceral, how you had to take a step back and really process walking into that house with that flag. And it was really such a human moment, because yeah, that would be a real, you'd have to think about, do I even want to go in this place with this giant Confederate flag? So kudos to you for sharing that story, because I think it's such a profound nuance of this conversation.
Thank you.
Next question. You also write about what you label, which I think is on point, performative DEI, and why it's so counterproductive. And just the reason I chuckled a little bit when I heard this, because when George Floyd happened, and a lot of corporates were doing different things. I was part of an organization, and I remember looking around one lunchtime, and we're gonna go out, and they had the leaders, and everybody was, we're going to kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. We're going to kneel, and I look around, and there's
kneel on rice, kneel on rice. No.
Right. And here are all these corporate leaders, and okay, and it's like, all right, the 8 minutes were up. All right, get back to work. I mean, it was. So when you wrote about that, I just kind of smiled, because I said, that's such a salient point about the performative nature of some of these programs. So can you speak to that and how you can address that when you see it?
Yeah, I think George Floyd, George Floyd was this moment and this unfortunate confluence, right? Because we had Ahmaud, right? We had Breonna. It was this like boom, 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 boom. Let's let's be straight, right? The stats show us that at least 2 Black people are killed by police every day,
Right.
right? So this is also happening every day. But there was this moment, right, of a Black man being hunted down in the street, a Black woman being killed in her bed, right? Like, and then all of a sudden, the video of a lynching, right? A lynching, a public lynching. And we also did not have a government response. And I think that that's part of the reason why the corporates came so hard.
Mm.
because obviously there's going to be a response, right? There's going to be a reclamation of power, right? There's going to be, uprisings, right, within certain communities about this murder, and who can tame, right? Who can get the public calm again? It's normally the government,
Right.
right? And the president would come out, right? And I mean, you even have pictures of George Bush trying to do it during Rodney King, right? Like,
Right.
hey, there's a better way,
Awkwardly,
blah,
of
blah,
course.
blah, right? Whether it was earnest or not, it was something
Right.
that leaders would then start negotiating, right? And you could move forward in some way. We now had an executive branch that was completely indifferent to this lynching, right? If not, I mean, on his best days, both siding the issue, right? So, who was going to be the power structure to come in and say this was wrong, right? And so you have Jamie Dimon taking a knee with his fists in the air, and so why do we know that's performative, right? Because Ben and Jerry, Ben Cohen also did things, right? But his wasn't performative, right? How do we know the difference? Well, a month after Jamie Dimon took that knee, he asked his shareholders to vote against a civil rights audit, a third party civil rights audit, right? It's understanding that those dots, especially for marginalized communities, especially, for the Black people at that moment, those dots get connected and we see that it's FOS, right? Like we see that it's performative. You didn't mean it. Like that knee and that fist, that means something to our community, right? You're sending out signs of solidarity. So if you're in solidarity with us, the least you can do is clean up your own side of the street, right? The least you can do is a third party audit. I mean, that's not even policy changing, right? That's literally a report which we can choose to never see the light of day,
Hmm.
right? So that's when it's performative, right? And I think, George Floyd, again, $50 billion, right, was pledged after that killing. And the latest stat I saw was about 258 million have actually made it to the streets, right? So performative, right? And that's why we have to talk about it, because I think what I hear companies say, right, as when I'm on the inside is like, well, we try and we just don't understand why. And the fact of the matter is that's your try, right? Your try is activist cosplay, and then when you get a moment to actually be an activist, you capitulate. And so that's really not helpful to us, right? And it's also why you will be called out on it, right? If you give us receipts, we're going to show you them. And a lot of people made a lot of pledges that were absolutely reactionary. That was not an organized response in any way. They didn't know where the money was coming from, where the money was going, right? They didn't know any of these things, but they did it anyway, and that's performative, right? I think the community would have actually respected the corporations if they were to say, we're gonna get rid of Corey, or laws that keep formerly incarcerated folks out, right? We're going to use our lobbying prowess to get the police reform bill passed, right? Like, keep your money, give us your resources, right? Like, because you're not going to give us that money anyway. So, help us in other ways that you might actually be able to pull off. I think the community would have been much more thankful, right, for a support in passing the police reform bill than a pledge of money that was never going to make it to the streets.
Very well said. The next question I have for you is kind of taking a step back, and it's something conversations I've been having with my peers, younger people, my dad. My dad. Thank God, my dad's still around. I get to talk to him.
Amen.
So as people of color, how much longer do we continue to knock on the door of corporate America, demanding to be let in, rather than trying to build our own corporate structures and businesses. Why keep asking to come in somewhere where we're not invited? And you write about Killer Mike, which is awesome, because I think he's on that street of trying
Right.
to.
Known, right?
Right,
Known. It's a
right.
bunch of people of color coming together, being like, we're
Exactly.
creating our own State Street, right?
Exactly. And so from that perspective, where's that pivot to where it's like, we need to start doing our own thing, or is it, or is, I mean, obviously corporate America is not going away, right? But at some point, how much longer do we have to knock, right?
Right. Right. And why do we keep knocking, right? Um, so, this is a really interesting tension, right? That I don't know how best we have this conversation, right? But it is, what is our tie to capitalism,
Mm.
to American capitalism, right? What is our tie there? So let's just put that there, right? As we're talking about that, let's just have this be a thought bubble sort of above the conversation. Um, we absolutely need to create our own economies, and we need to remind people that we have to do this every generation because it's taken from us and sometimes physically burnt to the ground, right? So we need to build and build, telling the world how we're building and that we need to protect this and that we don't want any more Tulsas and redlining and this and that and blah, blah, blah. I'm also completely down to have a Garveyite kind of conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we want to,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe we can do that too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now let's bring American capitalism back into the question, right? And I think we're doing both, right? We have entrepreneurs, we have people who are building economies as independently as they can and building economies within mainstream, right? A la Oprah Winfrey, right? A la Jay-Z, right? And these are really important, right? And we need them, and we need to continue to have that Black excellence, because they're the ones who can open the back doors. They're the ones who can get the windows open. They're the ones who can be like, when I flash the light 3 times, y'all come running in, right? And we need that. And that's what I saw when I was at the bank, right? I was able to put money out in the streets that I couldn't do with the CDFI I'm a chair of, right? That I couldn't even do with a fund, right? We were a small bank, 22 billion, right? It's not we can't compare, right? So we need that. And there also are people who want that, right? I work with amazing Black employees every day who work for corporations, who are bettering their lives and themselves, who weren't amazing football players, right? Like, but we're able to create 529s, right? We're able to get out of the community, jump a class, if you will, right? Because of them working their way up the corporate ladder. And I don't want to dismiss that, right? I
Right.
think that their journey is important for us, right? And they need to be able to be protected in those corporations. And we all buy stuff from the corporations, right? That hire these brothers and sisters. And we need to make sure that we have their back while they are, not all of us are corporate folks. And I think that goes across the line, right? Black, white, right? Whatever, gay, straight, right? But some folks are corporate folks, right? And they want to know that they're going to get a paycheck, a 401k, they're going to have a ladder to work up, and they're going to have a better life at the end of their career. And they deserve that, right? They deserve that too. Now, my last American capitalism wrap up. We could change so much, as you said, the minute we decide we're going to stop asking. As we saw with Harriet Tubman, right? And the famous quote, I freed 1,000 slaves and I could have freed 1,000 more, right? As we saw with Martin Luther King and how Harry Belafonte always used to say, if everyone who said they marched with Martin marched, the bridge would have fallen down. Right?
So
Like,
true.
we're not all there, right? We're some of us do want to be accepted, right? Some of us do want to ask. And so I think working towards self-determination is important, and doing it with love and understanding for us in particular, right? I was talking trash about, someone who I thought had, sold out the movement. This was decades ago. And one of the elders said, um, this is just the buzz between us and victory, right? Like we're like, they're all on our side, right? Like, yes, they messed up. Yes, they whatever, right? But they're not the enemy, right? And I think it's important, to, even, I try to even find love for Clarence Thomas, right? And be like, listen, he's just a Black man trying to get through, and while I have my own personal feelings, if I'm going to throw rocks at the Supreme Court, he's not getting the first rock. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't do it. Like,
Fair point.
and I have very strong feelings about the man, right? But is it Clarence, right? Or is it Mitch McConnell, Justice John Roberts, right? Is it all of them that allowed, and ain't none of us said he was our leader, right? Like, it
Right.
was them who gave him that power, right? Like, so, and again, not to make this about, but finding that empathy, I think, is important as we look at the movement and just what we want and people's journeys.
No, completely understand. Completely understand. And so I say I know I wanted to ask you that question because I think there is a feeling out there that we probably need to have a little bit more of that. We probably need to explore that a little more. And like I say, I think there are people like you mentioned who are doing it, but it's just at some point,
When
again,
are we ready to say
right,
okay, right?
right,
Like,
right,
because Garvey had the ship, right? I mean, he
yeah,
was like, let's go,
yeah,
right? And he couldn't fill it, right?
right,
Harriet Tubman didn't have a waiting list for the Underground Railroad. And and you think about that now and you think like that's insane, right? But then you look at, again, right? Like, we are more free now than we ever have been, and we're still here. Right, we're not dusting off plans of creating a free country, right? We're not we're not reading Franz Fanon and and um the way we were, right? So this idea of self-determination, I think, still very much has an American lens. And when we are ready, we have the blueprints, right? We have the
yep,
history. As long as we don't forget it, as long as we don't let them burn all the books, we will still have some of those blueprints. And that's one of the hard things that I realized in being an organizer, and I talk about in the book when I saw that quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and how I just like broke down because I felt like the last, decade plus of my life was a complete waste of time because we were creating these strategies that were being lost in a culture. That when I started doing this work, people were still kind of doing blackface, right? I mean, like
yeah,
there was
yeah.
still, right? Like,
No, it's true.
the Archie Bunker was still in reruns, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there was, still that feeling. And um, I think, at the end of the day, it's really important for us to recognize where we are and what we want to take forward, and then figure out how to do that, because yes, there will always be revolutionaries, thank goodness. But we also need to figure out why there's a part of human nature that is that gets comfortable quickly, right? That can let itself be boiled. Stalin had a saying, right? How do you pluck a chicken one feather at a time, right? To lessen the squawk, right? Like, it's a trope that a lot of authoritarian theories and leaders use because it works. And I think that's the conversation. I don't know how we have amongst ourselves. I
Sure.
don't know if we
Sure.
just have continuing, we get as many people to Ghana, as possible. And we have and again, I don't know if we need everybody, but to your point, I do think that we need more revolution, right? That we need to understand um that we should be reluctant victims.
Again, well said. Couldn't express it better. My last question for you, I'm gonna leave us on a note of hope. So, what message of hope or encouragement do you have for leaders committed to building more inclusive workplaces?
So, my message for hope for leaders is that once you start, it works. Just like working out, right? Like, no matter what you want to do for your health, if you start working out, in an earnest way, right? Like, you will feel better, even if you don't change a thing in your diet, right? Um, it's inevitable. So is this work. Once you do it in earnest, once you get through the 7 stages, right, you're able to get through that pushback and really make changes that'll shift your culture and make your company more welcoming. It'll make your company more innovative, right? It'll make your company retain talent for longer, retain better talent for longer. And that will all come once you start the work. So, the hope is in the doing, and it's up to you if you start that work. It's not up to me, right? People of color, women, people with disabilities, LGBTQ community, we all know the value we bring. We all know the value we bring to the world. It is, does your company know? And are you willing to do something about it? And if you are, just start, right? 5 minutes a day. And you will see a change for the better in your company.
Well, Malia, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I want to thank you for your time. It's a wonderful book. It's an excellent read. It's right on time. I think we are at a pivot point with these programs, and I think you have laid out a view and a vision of clarity that I think it's yeah, you're doing the work. You're doing the work, and congratulations and thank you for going into those spaces and advocating and really shedding light on the real problems that plague some of these corporations as it relates to diversity. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. My guest, this has been another edition of the Edric Show. My guest has been Malia Lazu. She is author of the new book, From Intention to Impact, A Practical Guide to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. You can get it everywhere. I'm assuming it's Amazon and local bookstore,
Local
anywhere.
bookstore,
Yep.
Kindle.
Yep. Get it. If there's if do you have a website or a place where people can
Yes,
go?
yes. You can go to the lazugroup.com, LAZU group.com, THE. Or you can go to MIT Press and find it there as well. But check me out, the lazugroup.com, at Malia Lazu on socials. And we can definitely help you find the book if you can't.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you again, Malia, for your time.
Thanks so much.
This has been another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome. As promised, this is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell. You'll get notified when I post this interesting content each and every week. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.